Hello class, hope you're having a good weekend and on a good Monday. This is COM 230 and this is a demonstration for exercise 2, that is the paintbrush exercise. So I'm going to go ahead and go into Adobe Illustrator and open up a new document. I'm showing you this part just because you want to make sure that you change the orientation of your document to the landscape format. It'll give you a lot more room to work. Alright. Before we get started, I do suggest that you turn on the grid. If you don't ordinarily work with that, this is really helpful for this particular assignment. And the most important part of this assignment is to keep that brush symmetrical and to get your reshape done correctly. Okay, most of this exercise is about reshaping and using symmetry with the grid. Okay, so I'm going to first start by creating the paintbrush on the far right, which is the all-white paintbrush. It's just the contour, the line. So most of this is done with basic shapes that are reshaped. First one I'm going to choose is the rectangle tool. And I'm going to work in the middle. I can always move it later. But I'm going to start by creating a long, thin rectangle. And I'm going to make that hollow for the time being because I want to be able to see my grid through that really easily. And I'm going to line that rectangle up on the grid. Okay, you can see I've used this center line on the grid so that I have a center point. That's going to be really helpful when I go to reshape this in just a few minutes. Okay, I'm actually going to make that a little bit longer and a little bit thinner. And reposition that a little bit. There we go. Okay, and next shape I want to create is a rectangle for the for part of the metal bracing. Again, that is a rectangle. And then I'm going to create one more to do the top and the bottom of that metal part. And I'm going to take all these and I'm going to line all of them up on the grid. Just makes it a lot easier. Okay. So, reshaping. Reshaping is something which is extremely useful. It's probably one of the most powerful tools in here for creating objects other than basic rectangles and ellipses and such. It's something which some students have a little struggle with right at first. There's a couple steps. I'm going to take you through them. First one is to select your direct selection tool. Okay, that's the white arrow, not the black one. And you want to click on the path that you wish to reshape. I'm going to start on the bottom of the paintbrush. And I'm going to click on that path. Then I'm going to find my reshape tool, which is under here. And then I'm going to click on that path, which I selected. And I'm going to pull down. Okay, and you should have a nice gentle point at the bottom. Since I'm still on reshape, I'm also going to come out. I'm going to select a place on my brush. I'm going to click on the path that I wish to reshape, and I'm going to pull that out. And you'll see that I am using the lines on the grid to tell me where to pull. And this will give you a nice symmetrical look to your paintbrush if you kind of pay attention to where you're pulling and at what point. And then I'm going to come down here. I'm going to go to right about here. I'm just going to pull that in a little. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Okay, and that's the handle of your paintbrush accomplished. Okay, so it's basically 3 reshape moves that you're doing. Okay, and I'm going to show you how to do the reshape on these other parts too if you weren't quite sure on how to get that. Okay, so again, I select my direct selection. I always click on the background first to make sure that nothing else is selected. Okay, you don't have to, but it makes it a lot easier if you do. So I click on the background with my direct selection. I click on the path that I wish to reshape. I go to my reshape tool. I click again on that path and I pull it down. And then I do the same on the bottom of that. Okay, and you should be left with a piece that looks like that. Now I could go ahead and recreate this again for the bottom, but since I'm interested in a lot of consistency and symmetry, I actually want to take that piece And I'm just going to make a copy of it. And you can make a copy using the Option key like I just did, or you can do copy and paste as well. Okay. Then I want to line these up. And I'm going to make this a little bit larger. Or actually, instead, I think I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. I'm going to move that over. I'm also going to take this and move it down. Okay, right now I can still see the back rectangle through these two objects because they are hollow, they're not filled with anything. But I'm going to change that in a few minutes. Okay, the next piece I want to create is the actual brush itself. And I'm going to use an ellipse. I'm going to create a simple ellipse. Okay, and you don't have to get the curve of the brush exactly the same that I do. Any curve is fine. You just want it to look like a brush tip when you get finished. With this one, I could use the reshape tool again, but instead I'm going to use my direct selection. And I'm going to click on the anchor point, and I'm going to use my handles to reshape this brush tip. To extend that out a little bit. And that really is all there is to that. You can play with all of them if you wish, but that's really quite fine as it is. It was just two simple moves. But you're clicking on the handles to change these shapes. Okay, you're not clicking on the anchor point. You have to first select the anchor point in order to see the handles. But once you have that, then you move the handles. Okay, and the shorter the handle, then the steeper the curve. The larger the handle, the softer the curve. Okay, and then of course you have the direction of the curve also. Okay, so I'm pretty satisfied with those. I might make this a little bit smaller. I'm going to go to my scale tool. There's a couple different ways that you can resize things. I tend to use the scale tool more often because it keeps all of the proportions of your objects together. Whereas if you just use your regular selection tool and reshape it like this, it does throw your proportions off. And sometimes that isn't a big deal, but other times it is. So you can do it either way. But when it comes to using text, I ask that you do not resize text using this method because it throws all of the proportions off, and it's almost impossible to duplicate those proportions of your text for other parts of your design. So for that, definitely use scale, or better yet, use the type menu and the tools in the type menu for rescaling your text. Alright, so I have all my basic pieces created. For the time being, I'm going to take all of those pieces and I'm going to fill them with white. Okay, it just makes it so that we can see all the pieces better. And then I'm going to assemble those pieces. I'm going to group those three together because I'm pretty satisfied with what that looks like. I'm going to come over and put that on here. I might need to resize that a little bit. Let me scale that up a hair. Okay, that's better. Still needs to be resized. Better. All right. Alright, I'm satisfied with that. One more pixel maybe. Alright, and then I'm going to take my brush tip. I'm going to put it in the top. Okay, I'm also going to arrange that to the back. Okay, and that is essentially my first paintbrush created. I might take this actually and scale it up just a little bit. Probably oversized that before. Okay, I like that better. Alright, now I'm going to take this whole thing, and it is a little large for the page, so I'm going to scale it down. I know it's a lot of scaling involved, but that way you get things to fit the way you want them to. Okay. I'm going to, oops, come here. and move this over. Alright, and that's the initial paintbrush created. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and save my file. You want to save often. Okay. Alright, now this is essentially a finished product, but I do need to use this as a version of my tilted paintbrush. I also need to add the colors. Now normally I would go ahead and start grouping everything together because it makes it easy to hold everything in place. But in this case I want to apply gradients to these before I tilt everything. So I'm going to make a copy of this so that I have one that I can work with. I'm going to go ahead and select all this and group it together. And now I have one completed and I have one that I need to add the colors and gradients to. Okay, so the first part is the paintbrush. That's easy. Find my swatches. Okay, I'm just going to use a brown color. Okay, you also notice that it has a black outline. I want to eliminate that black outline. You can use X on your keyboard or you can simply come over here and click on the outline. And you can either give it a non-outline or you can choose the same color brown. Okay, and it just eliminates that black line around the edge. Okay, the handle, you can make it any color you want. I chose black. Okay, it's got a black fill and a black stroke. Okay, and now for the gradient. There's actually two different gradients on this. The first one is on the top and the lower middle parts, and then the second gradient is on this middle part. Okay, I'm going to select, let me ungroup these. I'm going to select that top and bottom, and I'm going to apply a gradient. I'm going to click on gradients. Before I do that, let me pull this up. And gradients. Okay, now to make a gradient, this is the basic gradient that would be applied. Make sure you have the fill on top. And I'm going, come here, move out of the way a little bit. Alright, and I want to add, I have black on both edges and white in the center. So I'm just going to drag that down, and then I can adjust my gradient as I wish. Okay. I'm actually adding a slight angle to this just because the way the light is hitting it, according to me, is a little bit different. You can choose to do this gradient any way that you want. Okay, I'm pretty satisfied with that. Okay, I'm also going to come over to the stroke, and I'm going to simply eliminate the stroke. Actually, I'm sorry, I did leave a black line on that, so I'm going to leave it be as I did in the original. Okay, then grab the other black part. You can start with the same gradient if you want and then just adjust a little bit. That's probably the easiest thing that you can do. And I'm just putting it slightly off from the other one. Okay, you see the white highlight on these is slightly different. Okay. Again, you don't have to be extra precise with this. I just want you guys to know how to use the gradient palette and how to drag and drop and adjust your gradients. Okay, but you can just pull these colors off and you can pull them from the swatches panel onto here at any point. And if you have trouble by not being able to see one or the other of your palettes, like for instance you can't always see swatches along with gradient because they're under the same subset, so you can always pull these apart and do it that way. Alright, so I'm done with that. Alright, so this is basically my second brush completed. I'm going to group all this together. And then I'm going to rotate it. You can rotate with this double curved line, or you can also use your rotate tool. Okay, it's important that you do the gradients before you rotate, otherwise your gradients will be off. Alright. I'm gonna ungroup this item because I want to make a copy of this paintbrush tip so that I can use it for the colors. And I can regroup this together. Okay, I'm going to actually use this for the little tips of color. I'm just going to reshape this to fit over this. First thing I'm going to do is size it up a little bit. I'm going to make that about 110, let's try 115% of the original, because I want this tiny tip that I'm going to create to fit over this. I still might need to resize that down. Okay, so I'm going to use my direct selection tool, and I'm going to reshape this. Okay, but in doing it this way, the top of that tip stays essentially the same, and all my movement and all my kind of adjustment takes place on the bottom part. Okay, and again, it doesn't have to be exactly the same as mine. I could do that, I guess, but I'm more interested in you guys having the technique correct. Okay. I use Option to separate those two handles. If you don't remember that from the demo, it is kind of a helpful little tool. Alright, that's not bad looking. Alright, so this is basically my paint color. I think I did size it a little bit too large, so I'm just going to scale that back down. Oh, that's why. I thought it looked a lot larger. I must have hit 150 instead of 115. Alright, so let's take this down to about 90% of what it is now. Still too large. Yeah, let's eyeball this. Might be a little quicker. Actually, I can't eyeball it because I'm going to mess that up. Okay, that should work. Alright, so I'm going to give this a different color. And let's go find my swatches again. Thank you. Okay, you can start with any color you want. I'm going to make sure that my fill and my stroke are the same. I'm going to test it and make sure I like what it looks like on my brush. Make sure it covers appropriately. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to take a copy of that and I'm going to paste it. I actually need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 copies of this. Well, 5 now. And actually, I should show you another way of doing this. You can simply line up and rotate and align these by hand. I'm going to show you another way to do this. That for the next exercise, the one with the limes on it, it will help you. Okay, so I'm going to start with my original one. I'm just going to rotate that. So that it just is straight up and down. And then I'm going to use my reflect tools. Reflect is really nice for doing stuff like this. Actually, I should line these up the other way, shouldn't I? Alright, so now I can take these two and I can reflect again. And see if I remember my angles correct. Should be about 60 if I remember correctly. This is where we actually do use geometry. Okay, and I'm going to do it again. Copy. So now I have 2 sets. Have to redo this one. Okay, and then you can just hand align these a little bit. Alright, so I have my 6 colors. Pull those down, and I'm just basically going to select colors for these. You can use any color you like, of course. Alright, and last thing we need to do is just the paintbrush. And for this one you can use the actual paintbrush tool, and then we can add a stroke to it. So I'm just going to start by doing a wiggle, and then I'm going to go into strokes and paintbrush and my brushes. Okay, go into brushes, and there's a few that are already loaded. Not particularly useful ones in my opinion, so I'm going to go up to Windows and go to my brush library, and the ones that I tend to get the most use out of are under Artistic, and there's a number in here that I really like using, but the paintbrush ones are probably most appropriate for this. And I'm just going to pick the one that I like, maybe that one. I'm going to increase the stroke size. Oops. It is helpful if you select your paintbrush before you do this. Hello. Okay. And I'm going to actually choose another one. You'll also notice that one end is really rough and one end is quite smooth. Sometimes you have to flip the direction that you draw your paintbrush, or that you draw your paint stroke, sorry, in order to make this one work. Oops. There we go. And I'm just going to change that color. Oops. I just tried to fill that, if you noticed. I had the fill on top instead of the stroke on top. You don't want to fill your brush stroke. So you give that a fill of none. And repair. Alright, and that is the assignment done. Okay, that is exercise 2 in its entirety. If you get this and then add your name on this page, you are good to go.